If you wish to rise inside organized crime, understand first that the version of this life sold to you by movies is a lie, a myth engineered specifically to trap people like you were at 17. You don't begin with a dramatic invitation or a blood oath in a dimly lit basement. It starts much smaller, much more ordinary. It begins in a neighborhood where certain older men command a specific kind of quiet respect, a authority that has nothing to do with honest jobs or college degrees, men who never seem to sweat over rent or groceries the way your own family does. And you notice, long before any of them ever notice you, that simply standing near them buys a kind of safety on streets where safety is otherwise hard to come by. You run small errands first, nothing you would ever call criminal, even to yourself, carrying a sealed bag from one address to another without asking what's inside, standing on a street corner for an hour just to report a phone number. If a specific car passes by, you are paid modest cash for tasks so simple they feel almost harmless, and that feeling of harmlessness is the entire trap. Nobody in this life is ever recruited with a contract laid out in advance. You are recruited one small favor at a time, until one day you turn around and realize the distance behind you is already too far to walk back across. You are noticed by a mid-level figure in the local structure, a man who has clearly played this game many times before. He takes an interest in you that feels, for the very first time in your life, like genuine mentorship. He buys you meals. He asks about your family. He remembers small details you mentioned only once, weeks earlier. He offers advice that sounds like the guidance an uncle might give. And only years later do you finally see it for what it was. That attention was never personal. It was evaluation, a careful, patient assessment of whether you could follow instructions, keep your composure, and keep your mouth shut under pressure. 3 qualities the organization values far above raw toughness. You are given your first real test in your late teens, a task with actual risk attached to it, moving something you are explicitly told not to look inside across a distance that requires you to stay completely calm if you are stopped and questioned. Your hands shake the entire drive, your chest feels tight. But you complete it successfully, and the relief that follows is so intense it feels almost like euphoria. You do not yet understand that this specific cocktail, fear, followed by relief, followed by the approval of men you've come to respect, is the exact psychological loop that keeps you coming back for the next task and the next one after that. You are formally brought into the lower structure in your early 20s, given a small, defined territory to manage, collections to make, a handful of younger guys beneath you who answer to you the way you once answered to someone else, and you learn the true daily texture of this life very quickly. It is far less cinematic and far more administrative than anything you imagined as a teenager. Long stretches of tedious waiting punctuated by short bursts of genuine danger. Endless, careful arithmetic about who owes what to whom. And a constant, low-grade paranoia that never fully turns off because you have learned the golden rule of this business. The people most likely to hurt you are almost never strangers. They are colleagues, quietly calculating whether removing you creates more opportunity than keeping you around. You learn the code of silence not as an abstract rule, but as a practical survival mechanism, one enforced through consequences severe enough that you never once consider testing it. Early in your rise, you witness what happens to someone merely suspected of talking to the wrong person, an object lesson delivered without a single word ever spoken directly to you. And you understand from that single observation far more completely than any lecture could ever teach you exactly what the actual price of this life includes. You are stopped and questioned by investigators for the very first time in your early 20s. And in that dark, cold room, you discover something vital. Everything you were taught about composure under direct pressure was not theoretical preparation. It was the single skill standing between you and years of your life disappearing. You sit back. You answer with practiced, methodical vagueness, revealing absolutely nothing. You walk out those doors a free man, and when you return, the men above you notice. Your position rises because you have now proven something under real fire that talk alone could never prove. Your personal relationships fracture in a specific, predictable pattern, a decay that nearly everyone on this path eventually experiences. You cannot fully explain your income, your hours, your occasional sudden absences, or the specific chilling tension that enters a room when your phone rings at certain hours of the night. The people who love you are forced into a corner. They either learn not to ask questions, which quietly corrodes the relationship from the inside, or they keep asking, and that creates a gap, a distance you eventually have to choose between closing with a dangerous honesty or widening through continued evasion. Most people in this life choose the widening. You lose the relationship slowly, rather than all at once. A missed birthday here, a deflected question there, until one day the person who once knew everything about you looks at you and realizes, with a quiet sadness neither of you will ever fully name out loud, that they now know almost nothing true at all. You rise through your 20s by demonstrating the two qualities the organization actually rewards above street toughness: reliability and discretion. You take on responsibilities that other people are too reckless or too loud to ever be trusted with. Moving cash through carefully constructed channels designed to erase its origin. Cultivating relationships with people in adjacent, legitimate businesses who agree to let certain activities pass through their balance sheets in exchange for a quiet cut of the profits. And you learn the ultimate truth of this world. The actual infrastructure of organized crime looks far less like violence and far more like a shadow economy. An entire parallel system of favors, debts, and quiet arrangements, running smoothly right underneath the visible world most people believe is the only one that exists. You are present for a serious act of violence for the first time in your mid-20s, not something you initiate, but something you are ordered to assist with. The specific details of that night imprint on your mind permanently in a way nothing before it ever did. But the true shock comes afterward. You watch the men around you return to ordinary conversation within hours, laughing, eating, talking about sports, as though absolutely nothing occurred. And you realize the brutal truth: inside this world, the ability to completely compartmentalize violence is not seen as a psychological defect. It is treated as a professional asset. So you begin deliberately to cultivate that same numbness in yourself. Because the alternative, carrying the full emotional weight of what you witness, is simply not survivable long-term inside this life. You are promoted into a management role in your late 20s, no longer executing tasks directly, but overseeing the younger men who do. And the entire calculus of your daily existence shifts overnight. Now, you aren't just responsible for your own composure under pressure. You are responsible for the composure and loyalty of every single person beneath you. You quickly realize that managing people inside a criminal organization requires many of the same skills as running a legitimate corporation: motivation, conflict resolution, resource allocation. Except here, a mistake is never measured in lost quarterly revenue. It's measured in federal prison sentences, or worse. The margin for error that would be forgiven anywhere else in the business world simply does not exist here. And that truth settles permanently into your shoulders. It never fully lifts, not even on the rare, quiet evenings when nothing in particular is going wrong. You navigate a serious internal conflict in your 30s, a dispute between rival factions over territory or money that threatens to escalate into outright war. And you learn that survival at this level depends far less on raw strength than on cold political skill. It depends on reading which alliances are actually stable and which ones are already quietly dissolving behind closed doors. It depends on knowing precisely when to pledge public loyalty and when to keep a private distance from a faction that might not even exist a year from now. You watch colleagues who misread these shifting currents disappear from the structure entirely, sometimes through federal arrests, sometimes through something far more permanent. Their names simply stop mid-sentence in conversations you are no longer invited to fully participate in, leaving you to navigate the silence alone. You accumulate wealth you can never fully display. You drive a car carefully selected to match your official, documented income. You live in a home purchased through a complex network of structures designed specifically to obscure the true source of the money that paid for it. You learn to perform an entire second identity for tax authorities and casual acquaintances. A modest, unremarkable version of yourself, a phantom created for the sole purpose of avoiding the exact kind of visibility that eventually destroys almost everyone in this world. Because at this level, attention from sustained law enforcement is a death sentence. The performance is constant. It never stops. And after years of playing the actor, you find yourself sitting alone late at night, struggling to remember which version of yourself is actually real anymore. You are eventually made aware through the quiet, deliberate channels this world uses to pass serious news that you are under federal investigation. And in an instant, the entire texture of your daily existence changes. Every phone call is now potentially recorded. Every longtime associate is now potentially cooperating. Every seemingly ordinary, casual conversation you've had over the last 5 years is now being weighed for how it will sound, read aloud, to a jury in a courtroom. And in that stillness, you understand a truth with a clarity nothing before this moment ever quite delivered. The organization's promise of protection was always a myth. It was always conditional, always temporary. In the end, you are, and always were, entirely alone with whatever consequences eventually arrive, a realization that lands quietly, usually late at night, as you stare up at the ceiling of a house paid for by money you can never fully explain to anyone who asks. Some people at this stage of the path are arrested, facing decades built on evidence accumulated patiently over years. You watch once loyal colleagues trade intimate secrets about people they called family, exchanging lifetimes of brotherhood for reduced sentences of their own. You watch this happen to men you genuinely respected, men who sat you down when you were young and taught you the very code of silence, a code that ultimately did not survive contact with the specific, crushing desperation of facing the rest of their natural life behind a wall, and you finally accept the ultimate truth of this life. Loyalty inside this world, no matter how sincerely felt in the moment, has a breaking point. And if you stay in long enough, circumstance eventually finds it in almost everyone. Others reach a point in their 30s or 40s where they attempt to exit entirely, only to discover that this world does not offer a clean resignation. Knowledge accumulated over a decade of involvement makes you two things permanently: valuable and dangerous to the very people you'd be leaving behind. An exit, if it happens at all, requires a careful, patient negotiation that can take years, buying distance gradually, reducing visibility step by step, becoming quietly less useful until your absence causes less concern than your continued presence eventually would. A slow fade attempted by people who understand better than anyone that leaving loudly is often the single most dangerous decision available to them. And for those who survive long enough and rise high enough to reach genuine power inside this world, the reward rarely resembles the version imagined at 17, back when you watched respected men walk certain streets without fear. Because the actual texture of that power is isolation, a permanent low-grade suspicion of everyone around you, including the people closest to you. Wealth you can never openly enjoy, relationships you can never fully trust, and a constant, exhausting vigilance that never once for a single uninterrupted night allows you to fully relax. You understand, finally, decades into a path that began with a single bag you were told not to look inside, that the actual cost of this rise was never the risk of violence or arrest alone. It was the slow, complete forfeiture of an ordinary, trusting life, traded permanently for a version of respect that turned out, once you finally held it, to be built entirely on fear rather than anything resembling the genuine admiration you mistook it for as a teenager standing on a street corner, watching older men who never seemed to worry about anything at all. And somewhere, right now, on an ordinary street in an ordinary neighborhood, a teenager is noticing for the very first time that certain older men walk those blocks with a confidence that looks, from the outside, like freedom, with absolutely no understanding yet of the decades of isolation, betrayal, and quiet permanent fear that a single small favor is about to set into motion, or what it will feel like after everything to finally hold the kind of respect they once envied, only to discover it was never the thing they thought they were chasing at all.